They say that betrayal comes in many forms, but I never expected to discover that my wife's infidelity was being funded by money she had systematically stolen from our joint accounts. My name is Harrison, and this is the story of how uncovering my wife's affair led me to discover an elaborate financial scheme, and how I orchestrated a revenge so methodical that it exposed not just her infidelity, but the theft that had been financing her deception all along. My wife Lauren and I had been married for 8 years when she began what she described as a new fitness routine. She joined an upscale gym across town and started attending classes several times a week, often in the evenings after work. Lauren seemed energized by her new commitment to health and fitness, and I was supportive of her goals to get in better shape and develop healthier habits. Lauren had always been concerned about her appearance, but her new fitness routine seemed to take on an almost obsessive quality. She began spending significantly more time getting ready for her gym sessions, carefully selecting workout clothes and making sure her hair and makeup looked perfect even for exercise. When I commented on how dressed up she looked for the gym, she explained that the facility was very upscale and that she wanted to fit in with the other members. Along with her new fitness routine, Lauren also began paying much more attention to her overall appearance and wardrobe. She started buying expensive workout clothes, getting her hair styled more frequently, and purchasing new makeup and skincare products. When I asked about these expenses, she explained that looking good was an important part of feeling motivated to maintain her fitness goals. I was happy that Lauren was taking better care of herself and investing in her health and confidence. I assumed that her increased spending on fitness and appearance was a reasonable investment in her well-being, and I didn't question the expenses since we both had good incomes and our finances seemed stable. However, after several months of Lauren's new routine, I began to notice some concerning patterns in our household finances. Despite both of us earning steady salaries, our savings seemed to be growing more slowly than expected, and our monthly expenses appeared to be higher than our budget projections suggested they should be. When I mentioned these concerns to Lauren, she explained that there had been various unexpected expenses that had impacted our financial progress. She cited things like increased grocery costs, higher utility bills, and various household maintenance expenses that had required additional spending beyond our normal budget. These explanations seemed reasonable at first, and I trusted Lauren's management of our day-to-day finances. She had always been organized about paying bills and tracking expenses, and I assumed that she was keeping accurate records of our spending and that the increased costs were simply the result of inflation and normal household needs. But as more time passed, I continued to feel concerned about our financial situation. Our credit card balances seemed to be higher than usual, and our savings account wasn't growing at the rate that our income and spending patterns should have supported. I decided to take a more active role in monitoring our finances and began reviewing our bank statements and credit card bills more carefully. What I discovered was troubling and didn't match Lauren's explanations about our expenses. The bank statements showed numerous transactions that I didn't recognize, including cash withdrawals, restaurant charges, hotel bookings, and purchases at stores that Lauren had never mentioned visiting. Most concerning of all, I noticed regular transfers from our joint checking account to what appeared to be an external account. These transfers were always for specific amounts like $300 or $500, and they occurred with suspicious regularity, usually once or twice per month. When I asked Lauren about these transfers, she claimed that they were payments for various services and subscriptions that she had been handling on our behalf. She mentioned things like insurance premiums, gym membership fees, and payments for personal training sessions that were part of her fitness routine. But when I asked for more specific information about these payments, Lauren became evasive and claimed that she would need to look up the details. She seemed irritated that I was questioning her financial management and suggested that I was being unnecessarily controlling about money. This response troubled me because it was inconsistent with Lauren's usual openness about financial matters. Throughout our marriage, she had always been willing to discuss our expenses and financial decisions, and she had never been defensive or secretive about money-related questions. I decided to conduct a more thorough investigation of our financial accounts and Lauren's activities. I obtained detailed statements for all of our accounts and began analyzing our spending patterns and cash flows over the previous 6 months. What I discovered was shocking and revealed a pattern of deception that went far beyond what I had initially suspected. The regular transfers that I had noticed were indeed going to an external account, but it wasn't an account for legitimate expenses as Lauren had claimed. Instead, the transfers were going to a personal account that Lauren had opened in her name only. Over the course of 6 months, Lauren had systematically transferred more than $15,000 from our joint accounts to her private account. She had been doing this gradually and consistently, taking amounts that were significant but not large enough to create obvious gaps in our account balances. But the financial deception was only part of the story. When I examined how Lauren had been using the money in her private account, I discovered evidence of activities that had nothing to do with fitness or personal care. Her account showed payments for hotel rooms, expensive restaurant meals, gifts, and other expenses that suggested she was funding a lifestyle that she had been hiding from me. I also found evidence that Lauren had been using the stolen money to pay for dating services and social activities that were clearly not related to her gym membership or fitness routine. There were charges for dating apps, subscription services for meeting people, and payments for activities and events that she had never mentioned to me. The pattern of expenses made it clear that Lauren was not just stealing money from our joint accounts. She was using that money to fund an affair. The upscale gym membership, the expensive workout clothes, and the increased attention to her appearance were all part of a campaign to attract and maintain a relationship with someone else. I realized that Lauren's fitness routine had been a cover story for her affair, and that she had been systematically stealing money from our marriage to pay for her infidelity. She had been exploiting my trust and support for her health goals to fund activities that were destroying our marriage. The most painful aspect of Lauren's deception was understanding that every conversation we had about her fitness goals and every dollar I had supported her spending had been contaminated by her lies. She had been presenting herself as a wife who was working to improve herself and our relationship, while actually using our shared resources to betray our marriage. I also realized that Lauren's defensive reaction to my questions about our finances had been motivated by her need to protect her theft and her affair. She had been trying to discourage my involvement in our financial management to prevent me from discovering her systematic deception. I decided that Lauren needed to face consequences for both her infidelity and her theft, but I wanted to gather comprehensive evidence of both crimes before confronting her. I wanted her to understand that her deception had been discovered and documented, and that she would face appropriate consequences for her betrayal. The plan I developed was designed to expose both Lauren's affair and her financial theft in a way that would be undeniable and devastating. I wanted her to realize that her systematic deception had been completely unraveled and that she would face serious legal and personal consequences. Phase 1 involved gathering comprehensive evidence of Lauren's theft by documenting all of the transfers she had made to her private account and analyzing how she had used the stolen money. I wanted to create a detailed record of her financial crimes. Phase 2 involved investigating Lauren's affair by monitoring her activities and communications to identify who she was involved with and to understand the extent of her infidelity. I wanted to gather evidence that would connect her theft to her affair. Phase 3 involved consulting with attorneys and financial advisors to understand my legal options for addressing both Lauren's theft and her adultery. I wanted to explore both civil and criminal remedies for her systematic deception. Phase 4 was more personal and involved confronting Lauren with evidence of both her affair and her theft in a way that would force her to acknowledge the full scope of her betrayal. The final phase involved the legal and practical steps necessary to end our marriage, recover the stolen money, and ensure that Lauren faced appropriate consequences for both her infidelity and her financial crimes. The investigation phase took several weeks, during which I carefully monitored Lauren's activities and gathered evidence of her deception. I followed her to her supposed gym sessions and discovered that she was actually meeting with a man at various hotels and restaurants around the city. Through social media research and surveillance, I identified Lauren's lover as a divorced businessman named Kevin who owned several local restaurants. He was apparently someone she had met through a dating app, and their relationship had been ongoing for at least 6 months. I also discovered that Lauren had been using our stolen money not just to pay for hotels and meals, but to buy expensive gifts for Kevin and to fund activities and trips that they had taken together. She had essentially been using our joint resources to finance an elaborate affair that had required significant ongoing expenses. The evidence I gathered showed that Lauren's theft and her affair were completely interconnected. She had been stealing money from our marriage specifically to fund her relationship with Kevin, and she had been using her fitness routine as a cover story to explain her absences and her increased spending on appearance and activities. The confrontation happened on a Thursday evening in September, exactly 3 months after I had first noticed the unusual transfer patterns in our bank statements. Lauren had just returned from what she claimed was a particularly intense workout session, and I had prepared a comprehensive presentation of all the evidence I had gathered. Instead of engaging in our usual evening routine, I presented Lauren with detailed documentation of every transfer she had made to her private account, records of how she had spent the stolen money, photographs of her with Kevin at various locations, and evidence of their ongoing relationship. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I had financial records showing her systematic theft, photographic evidence of her affair, and documentation connecting the two crimes in a way that made it impossible for her to deny or minimize either aspect of her deception. Lauren's reaction was initially one of shock and panic as she realized that both her theft and her affair had been discovered and documented in detail. She tried to deny the evidence at first, claiming that I had misunderstood what I was seeing and that her relationship with Kevin was purely platonic. But the evidence was too comprehensive and specific for her denials to be credible. I had documentation showing not just her financial theft, but also intimate photographs and communications that proved the romantic nature of her relationship with Kevin. When Lauren realized that denial wasn't working, she changed tactics and tried to blame me for her actions. She claimed that she had felt neglected and unappreciated in our marriage, and that her relationship with Kevin had developed because I hadn't been meeting her emotional needs. But I was not interested in Lauren's attempts to justify her systematic theft and infidelity. The issue was not whether our marriage had problems, but whether she had chosen to address those problems through honest communication or through theft and deception. She had chosen to steal from our shared resources to fund an affair, and she needed to face the consequences of those choices. That evening, I also revealed that I had consulted with attorneys about my legal options for addressing both her theft and her adultery. I told her that I planned to pursue both civil and criminal remedies to recover the stolen money and to hold her accountable for her systematic deception. I explained that Lauren's theft from our joint accounts constituted criminal fraud, and that her use of stolen money to fund an affair made her crimes even more serious. I wanted her to understand that she would face significant legal and financial consequences for her actions. Lauren was devastated to learn that her theft could result in criminal charges and that she might face prosecution for her systematic deception. She begged me to handle the matter privately and suggested that we could work through our problems with counseling rather than legal action. But I had already made the decision that our marriage was over and that Lauren needed to face appropriate consequences for both her theft and her infidelity. Her systematic deception had destroyed the trust that was essential to our relationship, and her crimes had damaged our financial security and our future together. The legal and financial consequences for Lauren were swift and comprehensive. I filed for divorce immediately, citing both her adultery and her theft as grounds for the dissolution of our marriage. The evidence I had gathered provided clear documentation of both crimes, making it impossible for her to contest the divorce or claim an equal share of our assets. I also filed civil lawsuits against Lauren for theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty, seeking to recover all of the money she had stolen plus damages for the harm her actions had caused. The evidence of her systematic theft and her use of the money to fund an affair made these lawsuits straightforward and likely to succeed. Most importantly, I shared the evidence of Lauren's theft with law enforcement authorities who specialized in financial crimes. Her systematic theft from our joint accounts to fund an affair constituted serious criminal fraud, and she faced the possibility of prosecution and imprisonment. Lauren was also forced to face the personal consequences of her affair when I shared the evidence with Kevin's family and business associates. Kevin was a prominent businessman in our community, and the exposure of his affair with a married woman who was stealing money to fund their relationship damaged his reputation and his business relationships. The most satisfying aspect of Lauren's exposure was watching her realize that her attempt to use our shared resources to fund a secret life had ultimately led to the destruction of both her marriage and her affair. The money she had stolen to impress Kevin and maintain their relationship had also provided the evidence that exposed both of their deceptions. Lauren had thought she was being clever by using her fitness routine as a cover story and by taking money gradually to avoid detection. But she had failed to consider that financial records leave permanent trails and that systematic theft creates patterns that can be discovered and analyzed. The divorce proceedings were decisive and comprehensive. Lauren's theft and adultery were well documented through the evidence I had gathered, and she had no grounds to contest the dissolution of our marriage or to claim a significant portion of our remaining assets. Lauren was forced to return all of the money she had stolen, but she was also required to pay additional damages for the harm her theft and infidelity had caused to our marriage and our financial security. The court recognized that her systematic deception had been particularly egregious because it had involved both financial crimes and adultery. Most importantly, I was able to rebuild my financial security and my personal life free from Lauren's deception and betrayal. The recovered money allowed me to restore our savings and to move forward with financial goals that Lauren's theft had delayed or prevented. The experience taught me valuable lessons about the importance of maintaining oversight of family finances and paying attention to changes in behavior that might indicate deception. I learned that trust must be verified, especially when significant financial resources are involved. Looking back on this experience, I am proud of the way I handled the discovery of Lauren's theft and infidelity. I could have confronted her immediately when I first noticed the financial irregularities, but instead I took the time to gather comprehensive evidence that exposed the full scope of her deception. The marriage that I had thought was built on shared goals and mutual trust had actually been undermined by systematic theft and infidelity. But the process of exposing Lauren's crimes had also revealed my own strength and resilience, and it had prepared me to build healthier relationships in the future. Lauren's theft and affair had been interconnected crimes that had both damaged our marriage and violated the trust that was essential to our relationship. She had been willing to steal from our shared future to fund a relationship that was destroying our marriage, and she had used deception and manipulation to cover up both crimes. The revenge I orchestrated against Lauren was comprehensive and devastating, but it was also necessary to protect my interests and ensure that justice was served. Lauren had chosen to build her affair on stolen money, and she had to face the full consequences of both her theft and her infidelity. The financial records that had enabled Lauren's theft had also provided the evidence that exposed both her crimes. The irony was not lost on me that the very accounts she had used to steal money for her affair had also documented her theft and provided the proof needed to hold her accountable. In the end, Lauren's systematic deception had achieved the opposite of what she had intended. Instead of allowing her to maintain both her marriage and her affair, her crimes had ultimately cost her both relationships and had resulted in serious legal and financial consequences. The most important outcome of this entire experience was that I was able to reclaim my life and my financial security from Lauren's web of theft and deception. I was no longer living in a marriage built on lies and financial crimes, and I was free to build a new life based on honesty and integrity. The evidence that had exposed Lauren's theft and affair served as a reminder that systematic deception ultimately leaves traces that can be discovered and documented. Lauren's careful planning and gradual approach to both her theft and her affair had ultimately been no match for thorough investigation and analysis. Lauren learned that theft and infidelity come with consequences that extend far beyond the immediate goals they are meant to achieve. She lost her marriage, her financial security, and her freedom from legal prosecution. She discovered that the trust and love of the people closest to her, once broken through systematic betrayal, could not be easily repaired or replaced. The revenge was complete, the truth was exposed, and I was finally free to build a new life based on the values of honesty and financial integrity that Lauren had abandoned. I had won not just a legal victory in the divorce and civil proceedings, but a moral victory that validated my commitment to truth and accountability in relationships. Looking forward, I carried with me the lessons I had learned about the importance of financial oversight, behavioral awareness, and thorough investigation when suspicious patterns emerge. The experience had been painful and financially damaging, but it had also been educational and ultimately liberating. I had learned that I was capable of handling systematic betrayal with strategic thinking and appropriate legal action, and I had proven to myself that I would not tolerate theft and infidelity even from those closest to me. Lauren's story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of using financial deception to fund infidelity, and about the way that interconnected crimes ultimately create more evidence and more serious consequences than single acts of betrayal. Her downfall served as a reminder that building relationships on stolen foundations is ultimately unsustainable and self-destructive, and that systematic deception ultimately destroys not just the relationships it is meant to preserve, but the character and integrity of the person who chooses deception over honesty. The joint accounts that had been meant to represent our shared financial partnership had instead become the vehicle for Lauren's systematic theft and the funding source for her affair. But they had also provided the evidence I needed to expose her crimes and reclaim my future. In the end, the revenge was not just about recovering the money Lauren had stolen or exposing her affair. It was about vindicating the principles of honesty, fidelity, and financial integrity that she had abandoned, and about proving that systematic deception will ultimately be discovered and punished. The marriage that Lauren had destroyed through her theft and infidelity was replaced by a new understanding of what genuine partnership should look like, built on transparency, mutual respect, and shared commitment to honesty in all aspects of life. Her betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been educational, and I was determined to use those lessons to build better relationships in the future based on the values that truly mattered to me. Lauren's theft and affair, and the elaborate deception she had constructed to cover both crimes, had ultimately cost her everything that should have mattered to her: her marriage, her integrity, and her freedom from legal consequences. The financial records that exposed her theft and the evidence that documented her affair served as permanent reminders that truth has a way of revealing itself, no matter how carefully people try to hide their deception. The revenge was complete, justice was served, and I was finally free to move forward with my life, knowing that I had handled one of the most serious forms of personal betrayal with dignity, strategic thinking, and unwavering commitment to truth and legal accountability.